people can be wrong and they can be suffering. And as we recognize the truth of that, there has to be a level of compassion because those people are hurt. I mean, when you look at the people from the insurrection screaming and the stuff that they were doing, it's like, this is not normal. Mm-hmm. And so we got to rise above the rhetoric and what we're supposed to say for the culture and say what Jesus would have us say in this moment. And that's not always easy. Not everybody's going to like it, but that's why I appreciate Christians like you, Dr. Esau McCarley, Charlie Dates. It's not just accepting what, the narrative is. It's actually trying to seek something better.
What's up, everybody? You're watching another episode of the Jude 3 Project podcast. As always, I'm your host, Lisa Fields, the founder of the Jude 3 Project. I'm so excited to bring a dear friend of mine who's no stranger to the Jude 3 Project back on the podcast, Mr. Justin Giboney. Welcome, Justin.
Lisa, what's going on? As always, thanks for having me.
Thank you for joining us again. For those who may not know who you are, who haven't seen any of the past episodes of what you want here, just tell our audience a little bit about yourself.
Sure. I'm an attorney. I'm a political strategist, and I am the president of the AND campaign. The AND campaign is a Christian civic organization that's trying to raise civic literacy among Christians, but also help Christians apply biblical values to the issues of the day. And so my passion is really the intersection between faith and politics.
That's awesome. And I'm happy to serve on with you on the advisory board for AND campaign. So today we've had an election just an election finally passed. We have a new president, which I'm thankful for. We don't have to worry about our president tweeting. We don't have to worry about what our president will tweet when we wake up. Right. But when we think about the new administration, what excites you about the new administration coming up?
Well, number one, we know how much damage the Trump administration did just to the institution of the presidency, but also to the reputation of America in general. And so I number one, I'm looking forward to, like you said, just not having to see a controversy every night because we have somebody in office who doesn't have the discipline not to put something out there that is really destructive to America, but also repairing kind of our relationships abroad. But even bigger than that, I think the number one thing that has to be the focus, and I think we're seeing will hopefully be the priority initially, is handling COVID. We've had over 400,000 deaths. It's still not safe. People are tired of social distancing, and to have this vaccination plan that he just put out there, to know that they're really focusing in on this conversation and that you don't have a whole bunch of ego and all this other stuff in the way of actually getting things done for the American people. So that vaccination plan is big, but also getting help and relief to the American people directly, whether it be $1,400 checks or $2,000 checks. This is something that's long overdue and that the people need. So I really want to see Biden focus in on the people, on job training, on working, on social justice, things of that nature. And so I'm looking forward to that and just a different tone and tenor when it comes to what we see from the White House.
Yes, definitely. And so there's a lot of positives that we're excited about. What are some things that we should be concerned about with the new administration? What are some challenges that you think we'll have to overcome? And what are some challenges that you think will be for Christians with the new administration?
Yeah, so as the celebrations subside, and I know not every Christian is celebrating this, I do think we need to keep in mind that this is, the presidency and the influences that are going to be on Biden are not all Christian friendly. And so one of the things that I worry about, and one of the things that I've been telling Christians to keep their eye on, I don't care how excited you are about Biden and Kamala Harris, you got to keep your eye on how the kind of the secular left is going to push them in certain directions with different policy. And so I do think, and this is something that I've kind of been urging the Black church to address, even though we'll address it surely very differently than white evangelicals, is the conversation about religious liberty. It matters to us. We don't want our institutions, our churches, our schools that are faith-based to be forced to do things that are outside of our convictions. And so we have to keep an eye on things like the Equality Act. Now, I know the Equality Act sounds great, but any sophisticated political person is going to let you know you never judge a bill by its name. It has some things in there that could really hurt the church, that could really impede the church's ability to fund schools. For instance, it could force a faith-based hospital to do sex reassignment surgery when it's really against their values, even though they serve transgender people and everybody. They serve everybody. They just don't want to do those type of surgeries because they think it's actually harmful to people. These are the type of things that we have to watch coming from the administration. I think there's some very extreme abortion laws that could come out of it. And so we just have to keep our eye peeled. And that's why I really urge Christians not just to be partisan. Look, I've been a Democrat my whole life, but we have to be a little more shrewd and sophisticated than that and understand the policies that are helpful to our community. Then also understand that there are things that the Democrats do too that can be hurtful. And so it's a matter of kind of rising above the just choose a side, very simplistic conversation and saying, well, I may be a Democrat or I may be a Republican, but I still have to watch and make sure that they're doing things that are helping people, not just Christians, but helping people in general. Because when you talk about the Equality Act and things like that, that's not just harming Christians, it's Muslims, it's our Jewish brothers and sisters. And so we really have to watch out for that stuff.
Mm-hmm. That's extremely helpful, and I think important for many to note, because I think many have missed that and the unintended consequences that it could have for our communities and for our religious institutions, not just, like you said, just affecting Christians, but other faith communities as well. One of the things that I think people struggle with is when they vote someone in and they're excited, they think that's the end of it.
Mm-hmm.
What would you encourage our Black Christians to do in response to things like the Equality Act to help us push back or to be even a voice at the table so other voices don't just dominate the day?
Yeah, I mean, in a way, and I always say this: your vote is the end of one process, which is the election process, the primaries, and all that stuff, and the beginning of another process, which is the process of making sure that you're holding people accountable. If you just go vote and you leave your elected officials to their own devices, there's no guarantee that you're going to get what you asked for. One of the mistakes I think we make sometimes is because we get so excited about the candidates that we voted for, we feel that our only job once they get in office is to protect them, is to make sure that they can't be attacked, is to make sure that we justify everything they do. That's exactly what a lot of white evangelicals did when it came to Trump. They didn't hold him to the standards that they had said and all those things. They felt like they needed to protect him because the progressives were so bad. We shouldn't make the same mistake. We need to make sure that once we get someone in office, when they do good things, we let them know they did it, and we encourage them when it comes to those things. But we also have to push back, because the way that politics works, and I say this over and over again, politics is chess. It is not a emotional game of tic-tac-toe. We have to make sure that we're pushing, because if you're not pushing, somebody else is. And so you have to make sure that you don't just stop at the vote, that you hold your politicians accountable, that you let them know what you want and what you don't want and how they should proceed. African Americans brought Biden into office. And so we should, especially Christians, we should have a major say in what he does and what he doesn't do. And there are many things, and I think the progressive platform and the progressive point of view that can be helpful to us. But as Christians, there are also some things that aren't so helpful, and we need to be vigilant about that and step the game up a little bit.
Mm-hmm. One of the things you have plans that you talked about, I think, in the 2020 layout for and campaign was how we can have LGBTQ rights and also religious freedom. Can you talk about that a little bit to show kind of how we can navigate through that in a way that's more balanced than maybe some of the on the extreme right have dealt with it?
Absolutely. One of the things the AND campaign tries to do, and we talk about this quite a bit and talked about it in our book, is help Christians understand that sometimes you need to reframe the question. So as an attorney, Lisa, I can always ask you a question where there's two wrong answers. And I think that's what's happening in our society right now, especially on the LGBTQ conversation. Christians are given two wrong answers, and we're forced to take one of those answers. And a lot of what we're given right now is either you hate somebody or you completely affirm everything. And that's just not how life works. That's not how our relationships work with people that we love or anything else. You can have a strong disagreement with somebody, but still love them. And I think that principle applies to the religious liberty and LGBTQ rights conversation. Look, the church has to do a lot better when it comes to LGBTQ rights. I think in many ways we have to repent. I know that I personally have had to repent. We have to do better. There is no way that anybody in our community, LGBTQ or otherwise, should be discriminated at their job at FedEx or unable to get housing because of how they identify. There is nothing in the gospel about that. In fact, I would say the gospel pushes back against that kind of standard. So that's one thing we have to know. But at the same time, I don't think religious institutions should be forced to go against their beliefs just to accommodate every conversation that comes to when we talk about the LGBTQ. So the way that it's set up now is that either you deny all the rights of LGBTQ people, or you have to affirm everything and just go along with it uncritically. And what the AND campaign is saying, and many others are starting to say, is no, I think there's a better answer. Those two answers are wrong. There's a better answer that says, no, we will protect LGBTQ civil rights, but that does not mean that we have to affirm everything in our institutions and change our beliefs to go along with that. So one of the things, again, this is where the Equality Act comes in and why I think it's bad, and where people need to realize they didn't come, the Democrats didn't come to the church and explain the Equality Act, and there's a reason for it. They don't want you to know what's in it. They just want you to hear the name and think that it's good. But if this actually goes through and it's in Biden's 100-day plan, if this actually goes through, you'll have a situation where Christian colleges will be put out of business because they just won't have the money to defend all the lawsuits that'll be coming at them for not bending and doing everything that the LGBTQ lobby would have them do. But I think there's a way through this. The Fairness for All Act is one way to think about it, where we can give LGBTQ rights and protect religious freedom. Those two things do not have to be in conflict, but we have to think it through and come up with better solutions rather than just settling for what conservatives or progressives are giving us. Christians have to do a little more work in that regard.
And there's precedents, right, for it working in, is it Utah?
Yeah, no, great point. I'm glad you brought that up, Lisa. Absolutely. In Utah, the Mormon community came together with the LGBTQ community. And that's where the Fairness for All Act came from. They actually sat down, which we don't do anymore. We just say what we want and push it through. These two communities who disagree on things actually sat down and said, how can we work together? Because we do care about each other. We do have to live together. And they came up with something that worked for both sides. The Equality Act is not the product of that type of conversation, of that type of compromise, of that type of putting community first and thinking through the issue. What the Equality Act is one side of the conversation, writing down everything they want, giving it to their politicians who they have paid a lot of money to, and saying, you better get this done. The Black church is in a position to say, no, that's not how it should go. We care for people. We love people. We may even have to repent, but we still have convictions that are timeless and unconditional.
Mm-hmm. I'm glad you brought up them sitting down together. It seems like we have become more and more polarized, obviously, with the former administration that was divisive in their rhetoric. How can we become, do you think there's a possibility of us being able to come back together?
Oh, there's always a possibility for us to come back together. I mean, that's just a matter of faith and believing in the gospel. But we have to start to see things differently. We have to start to understand that we need to have direct conversations with one another, and we need to do things differently. Politics doesn't work if we can't find any common ground. And there's no reason that Christians who are Bible believing, who believe in the gospel, shouldn't be able to find common ground with other people. Now, one thing I think we have to do, and this is what I push back heavily on white evangelicals on, is Christian politics can't be about Christian self-interest. It has to be about defending the human dignity of others and promoting human flourishing. It's not just about us, it's about other people. And that's what the gospel teaches us. That's what the great commandment teaches us. When we're talking about love your neighbor as yourself, you're talking about doing things for them and being self-sacrificial because you're caring for other people like you care for yourself. And so we do have to sit down. We have to get rid of the vitriol and the tough talk and always trying to defend ourselves, and really focus on other people, really take ourselves in a certain ways outside of these partisan and ideological mindsets, and really say, you know what, I may be a Democrat, I may be a Republican, but as a Christian first, There's a certain level of respect I have to have for other people. There's a certain level of selflessness that I have to have when I'm going into these conversations. We have to go into conversations as Christians, not always in a posture of self-defense, but really in a posture of self-examination. And I think that helps us get to a greater conversation, but also being willing to step out of our comfort zones and advocate for things that we may not have advocated for before, because neither side, when it comes to Christianity, is advocating for everything that it could be, and we all could do a lot better.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I agree. What do you think the insurrection taught us about the state of the country, and what can we learn from that interesting and horrible day?
I think hopefully, I think it taught we stepped over a line. There's so much to say right now. I mean, we stepped over a line. There was a line that was crossed in that moment. And one of the things that was truly disheartening was to see that there were people who had Jesus saves flags and people who called themselves Christians in the midst of something that was completely out of line, that was completely unbiblical, that was hateful, and that was really based off of falsehood. Mm-hmm. That had no truth in it. And to see Christians acting as somehow there was some Christian spirit behind this, some Christian conviction behind this, was really just sad. So that's the first thing that we saw. And I hope what we also see, though, was hurting people. Now, these people need to be prosecuted. These people need to pay the consequences. So don't get me wrong about that. But if we can look at that and all we see is people who we can laugh at, people who look like buffoons to us. Okay, you can see that. But as a Christian, you should see the hurt that somebody who would go to that extent, whether it's their racism, whether it's their misunderstanding of certain things, or just that they've been sold a bill of goods, there should be a level of compassion there too. And so I'm hoping that we can look at this with love and truth, the truth that this was completely outside the bounds of anything that's Christian, but also the love to say, if I may have grown up like some of these folks, if my parents had lied to me, if I believed in a leader who was lying to me, I could possibly be in the same place. And it's but for God's grace that I'm not in that place. If Christians can't look at it and do all of that, then I think we're in a bad place. And I hope that's something that we learn, that truth matters because it's untruths that got us there, but also compassion matters. And we have to make sure that we don't become the people that we think got us into the place that we're in.
Mm-hmm. I think that's a great point. One of the things President Obama was talked about when he talked about rural America, he talked about sometimes we don't think about the poverty that's in rural America and what people are navigating through. And as you go to visit, you understand people's different conditions and see their conditions in some of their spaces are horrible. And they're frustrated with those conditions. But I think if you're in a more urban area, you have upward mobility, you start to be disconnected. And that goes with whether it's rural America or the inner cities of America. You're like, what is happening? And so I do think it's important to put ourselves in other people's shoes, because people are dealing with suffering, and because they're in poverty, they have a hard time understanding the concept of privilege because they've grown up in very horrible conditions in rural America, which is hard for us to fathom. But I do think in order to move forward, we have to have those conversations about that as well.
Lisa, you're preaching with that one. I mean, you hit it on the head. When it comes to lower income white people, the life expectancy of white males in that demographic is going down. These are people who are dying of deaths of despair, which is suicide and drug overdoses. So if as a community, if as Christians, I know what Black Twitter says, I know what these other folks say we're supposed to think. If you can't feel compassion for people like that, it doesn't mean you agree with them. It doesn't mean that they get to avoid consequences. But if you feel like they don't suffer, if somehow you've come to believe that they don't suffer like you do, or there's not issues that they go through, then you're missing it. And you've bought into something that probably led a lot of white evangelicals where they are right now. Not human, dehumanizing people and not understanding where they come from. So people can be wrong and they can be suffering. And as we recognize the truth of that, there has to be a level of compassion, because those people are hurt. I mean, when you look at the people from the insurrection screaming and the stuff that they were doing, it's like this is not normal. And so we got to rise above the rhetoric and what we're supposed to say for the culture and say what Jesus would have us say in this moment. And that's not always easy. Not everybody's going to like it, but that's why I appreciate Christians like you, Dr. Esau McCarley, Charlie Dates. It's not just accepting what, the narrative is. It's actually trying to seek something better.
Yeah, and I love what you said. People can be wrong and they can be suffering at the same time, and then that it flips. People can be affluent and really taking full advantage of their privilege and still be suffering, or still are just completely ignorant and
Trump.
yeah. Exactly. And so I think understanding all those perspectives helps us understand nuance. And you don't have to agree with their methods or what they do, but if you want to bridge a gap, you have to at least try to understand, to have some kind of conversation. And I think that's the most challenging part for the world, because everybody's telling you don't have to have the conversation. But if we can't, it's like thinking about, it's still 70 million people who voted for Trump. And so, like, how are we going to move forward? We need the Senate is split 50-50. We have to work together.
Yeah, and it's not. Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, that's all I had to say.
And it's not just enough to say they're stupid. It's not just enough to say they're stupid and hateful and that explains everything. Nah, man, you got to read some other writers, listen to other people. It's not to say that what you read is going to justify it, but it may show you that it's a little deeper than that. And I think, unfortunately, the narratives that we follow, what we hear from secular society is say, dismiss them, they're stupid, they're hateful, and that's the whole story. No. Everybody has a testimony. Everybody has a story. And until you really heard it, I think we have to reserve judgment, even if we know that someone's wrong.
That's helpful. Where do you think we're in the political landscape as it relates to the vaccine and COVID relief? What do you think can be done better? And what is the challenges that you foresee this current administration having with COVID relief?
One of the issues they'll have is just that the rollout when it came to the Trump administration, when we're talking about vaccines, when we're talking about, getting relief to the people, was just bad. There was not leadership. And the crazy part about it is when you have crises like this, it actually makes it easier sometimes for the leader to get reelected, because people just want to see you stand up and be a leader. And if you stand up and you're a leader, whether you make a few mistakes or not, people are with you. But we had a president who could not stand up and to be a leader, who was thinking about all kinds of other things rather than just the people. And so it puts the Biden administration in a situation where they're behind on the vaccine rollout, where they don't have the type of plan that they need to have, where people are suffering. And they've just got some catching up to do. So I think they're going to have to kind of reset. They're going to have to get on it very quickly. As I said, I think it was last week, Biden announced what his vaccination plan would be. He also announced what I think he called his America Rescue Plan, which will be, the $1,400 in addition to the $600 that people got direct payment to people. So they'll be getting checks and direct deposits. I think that's important. Extending the eviction ban, extending unemployment benefits, all that stuff is going to be stuff that they're going to try to do immediately. Now, the issue with it is that they need 10 Republican votes. So things like the $15 minimum wage, being raised, I don't know that stuff's going to happen, but I think hopefully they can work to get those 10 Republicans to move this along. Otherwise, they're going to have to go through other options. But I do appreciate how the Biden administration has made this a priority, and they're saying, look, the people need it. We need to get this done. And hopefully folks who claim that they're populist to some extent, like Rubio and folks like that, will jump on board and do the right thing for the American people.
That's encouraging, and it is discouraging that the fact that it seems like the Trump administration was not doing anything really. When I was reading something this morning, it was basically saying that the Trump administration kind of left nothing for the Biden administration kind of to follow in the vaccination rollout. And so it's almost if they had been lying to us that whole time, which is not hard to fathom, considering Trump's continual lies. But how much patience should we have with the current administration? Because I know Most people think when you come in, you can just change everything, and so they lose patience with the administration. What is some what kind of patience should we have with them?
You got to have a level of patience. I mean, we have a sense of urgency. We need to see that they have a sense of urgency. And if they're showing that sense of urgency, if they have plans, if the plans are thorough, then we have to give it a chance to be implemented and understand that we don't have a king, we have a president. And we have a series of checks and balances that he has to go through to get things done. And this is the same thing I would say I said for Trump, right? That somebody can't just come in and change everything. You do have to have a certain level of a patience for them. But at the same time, there are things that they can do. So there are executive orders. We need to immediately be looking at some of the executive orders that have been put out. I think some of them are really good. Others are very, very questionable. And these are things that he signed basically on Inauguration Day. So yeah, we just have to understand the process. And this is when I talk about raising civic literacy, understanding what it means to be in a republic, the checks and balances, but also saying we need a sense of urgency, and we need leadership. And that's what we should be looking for. That, do you have a plan, and how are you going about that plan? Unfortunately, I'll say that the Trump administration did okay when it came to incentivizing coming up with a vaccine. But as far as the rollout, it left the Biden administration hanging and with not much to work with.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's important to note. When you think about Black Twitter and discourse and civic engagement, and what do you think is the helpful things about it, and what do you think are harmful things?
Whew. Helpful, it can be just the information. I mean, you can get a lot of it. I like Twitter because I can get different articles. You see things as they happen, and you can really keep up with where the spirit of the day is at, and what people are saying, and how folks are feeling. The bad part is just the mob mentality. The forced conformity, that if you don't say what we want you to say, then you don't really care. If you don't talk about it this way, then you're white adjacent, which means you said something that I don't like, or that doesn't go along with what Black Twitter says in many cases, not all cases. And so you just have to be on there and have a little bit of courage, man. I mean, especially for Christians, one of the worst things that Christians can do in this very tense moment is just parrot what Black Twitter is saying, what white Twitter, anybody is saying. We have to be critical thinkers. We have to be shrewd. And you got to have a little bit of courage to say, yeah, I believe in justice, but that doesn't mean I'm going to go along with everything the secular progressives say. Yes, I believe in biblical values and orthodoxy, but I completely reject how white evangelicals go about it. And some of the stuff they do is not orthodoxy at all. But you got to be willing to stand on your own too. And the beauty of it is, I think, between some of the people that we named before, we're also building a community of people who are willing to do that, which makes it easier, right? Which means you don't have to do that by yourself. So there is a mob mentality. I think we need to push against that. I think the information that we get is good. The laughs a lot of times are good. You get to see Black culture and people doing their thing, but we can't allow that to get us off of our kind of straight and narrow road of what the gospel should have us do. And Christians just got to be confident. I mean, you just see too many Christians that are talking about justice, that are talking about these issues, but don't have the self-confidence to stand up to their own tribe to say, we agree here, but I don't agree there. They want the retweets, and they want it from people who may be pushing them in the wrong direction. And we shouldn't be in it for that. We got to be in it to tell the truth and to be loving.
Yes, definitely. Well, y'all released the book, The End Campaign, you, Michael Ware, and Chris
Butler.
Chris Butler co-authored it together. Tell us a little bit about the book and why it's important.
Yeah, so it's called Compassion and Conviction, and this is the AND Campaign's guide to faithful civic engagement. And we were lucky enough to have a foreword by Barbara Williams Skinner, which you got to look her up. Barbara Williams Skinner is a sister that has been in D.C., that's been going hard for the kingdom for a long time, man. And she's really something that we kind of model what we do after. But really what we were trying to do with this is give Christians a framework for engaging politics. The truth of the matter is that Christians don't have to agree on everything when it comes to politics, because the Bible doesn't speak about exactly what to do in every situation or how to go about being loving when it comes to policy in every situation. So what we want to do is to create a framework based on compassion and conviction to help Christians out. Because one of the things we say, and you're familiar with this, Lisa, is that when we go into the civic space or the political space, we walk into this false dichotomy. And this false dichotomy tells us that if we care about justice, we'll go to the left. And if we care about moral order and Christian convictions, then we'll go to the right. But the truth is, we shouldn't have to make that choice. That if we look in the gospel, Jesus didn't decide between love and truth or justice and moral order. He had both. And that's really what the AND campaign means. Love and truth, social justice and moral order. And Christians have to find a way to do both, but we can't do it by just taking what's provided to us on the menu by Republicans or Democrats, by progressives or conservatives. In some ways, we have to find our own way, and we have to be willing to challenge both sides. And so in the book, we talk about how Christians should deal with partisanship, because we do think partisanship has practical value, but it can't be the master of your social action. We talk about rhetoric. We talk about why Christians should engage. And we talk about what really is the relationship between church and state. So for Christians who know a lot about politics, but just want to see it in a more Christian way, or for Christians who don't know hardly anything about politics, this is very helpful for you. I'm at my church. I'm actually doing a Bible study on this. So it's very Bible study friendly. Every chapter has questions and exercises that come along with it. It was actually built for churches to give them a resource to equip them to engaging better. And that's all we were trying to do. We heard of pastors who had people fighting about politics in their church, and we wanted to make sure that we went and gave people a resource to help them deal with politics better.
Awesome. It is a helpful resource, and I encourage you all to get it. I have it on my bookshelf over there. So definitely get Compassion and Conviction. Justin, what other things that we haven't talked about that you will want our audience to know before we leave?
Well, I would just say this, especially when we're talking about this next administration. Again, it was in many ways Black Christians who brought this administration in. And both our president and our vice president, I think, have a lot of potential. I think they can do a lot of good things, but they've done things in the past that aren't necessarily helpful to the church either. I mean, if you go back and look at some of the Judiciary Committee hearings and how Kamala Harris talked to Christians who are trying to be judges, and what she said about their Christian convictions, is not something that any of us should be happy about. So we just have to be vigilant about that. We should push them to take care of what I'm calling these disparity issues. These are the issues that most Black people were caring about. We're talking about disparities in healthcare. We're talking about disparities in education, in housing. These are the things that we want them to be focused on, of course, when they handle COVID and all that stuff. We didn't put them in office to be just talking about some of these more kind of bourgeoisie progressive or elite progressive culture war issues. We didn't put you in there to have, no limits on abortion. We didn't put you in there to do these sweeping changes when it comes to gender and to make sure that biological men could play women's sports and all these other things. That's not what the people need. The people need job training. The people need help of eating and all of these things. That's what we want to focus on, housing included. So I would just really push Christians to focus in. Don't get too high or too low. Don't follow a politician too closely or think you always have to defend them. Hold them accountable. That's what that's how this political game works. And if we're not willing to do that, we're not helping we're not hurting the other side. We're hurting ourselves. And so if we care about people, we're going to make sure not only Republicans do what they're supposed to do, but that Democrats do what they're supposed to do, because you never leave these folks to their own devices.
That is so true. Well, thank you, Justin, for joining us. Make sure y'all get his book. You can get it. Is it on Amazon and at andcampaign.org as well, correct?
Yeah, you can go to Amazon. You can go to InterVarsity Press, which is our publisher, and find the book. And we would really appreciate it. And we think it'll benefit you. If you have friends or people who are just getting politics wrong, this is a great gift for them too.
Awesome. And how can people get in contact with you on social?
Yeah, so you can follow the AND campaign on Twitter and Instagram at AND campaign, AND campaign. You can follow me on Twitter and Instagram at Justin E. Giboney, Justin E. Giboney on Instagram, again, on Instagram and Twitter, man. And we would love to have you join the AND campaign team, which is growing and growing, because we got a lot of work to do in the civic space.
Awesome. Thank you, Justin, for all your hard work. And thank you all for watching another episode of the Jude 3 Project podcast. Here at the Jude 3 Project, we're helping you know what you believe and why. Remember, you can get our curriculum through Eyes of Color, take our online course, or you can become a monthly partner at jude3project.org. Until next time, this has been another episode of the Jude 3 Project. Grace and peace.